The pool pump's dying hum echoed through the midnight air as Sarah watched 20,000 gallons of crystal clear water spiraled down the drain. Tomorrow, Karen Whitmore would arrive with her 60 guests, expecting a poolside paradise for her precious daughters, sweet 16. Instead, she'd find nothing but concrete walls and the bitter taste of consequences. Sarah's trembling finger hovered over the final switch, the one that would complete 3 months of meticulous planning and deliver the justice that the HOA board never would. In exactly 18 hours, Karen would learn what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness, and Sarah Chen would discover just how far she was willing to go for revenge. Part 1. The breaking point. Sarah Chen pressed her face against the kitchen window, watching Karen Whitmore march across her pristine lawn like a general surveying conquered territory. The morning sun caught the sequins on Karen's yoga outfit, sending prismatic flashes that made Sarah's temples throb. Behind Karen trailed her usual entourage, Linda Pemberton, clutching her ever-present clipboard, and Janet Morrison with her phone perpetually raised, documenting every moment of suburban drama for her Instagram followers. "Here we go," Sarah muttered, recognizing the determined set of Karen's shoulders. 3 years of living next door had taught her to read the warning signs like a meteorologist tracking storm fronts. The doorbell's melodic chime cut through the morning quiet, followed immediately by Karen's signature rapid-fire knocking. Sarah counted to 10, then 20, savoring these final moments of peace before opening the door. Sarah, perfect timing. Karen pushed past her into the foyer without invitation, her designer sneakers squeaking against the hardwood. "We need to discuss the pool situation. Good morning to you too, Karen." Sarah closed the door with deliberate calm, though her pulse quickened. "Coffee? No time. Madison's party is in 3 days, and we have logistics to iron out." Karen swept into the living room, Linda and Janet flanking her like bodyguards. "I've finalized the guest list: 67 people, including the volleyball team and their parents. The caterers will need access to your backyard by noon on Saturday, and will need the pool heated to exactly 82 degrees. Sarah blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "The pool, Sarah, for Madison's Sweet 16. Karen spoke with the patience reserved for small children and the mentally impaired. "We discussed this at the HOA meeting last month." "No, we didn't." Sarah's voice remained steady, but her hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You mentioned wanting to use the community pool, but it's being resurfaced." "I never agreed to anything involving my pool." Karen's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Oh, don't be dramatic. It's not like you use it. How many times have I seen you out there?" "Twice. 3 times all summer." "That's not the point." "The point," Karen interrupted, pulling out her phone, "is community spirit. Linda, show her the pictures from last year's party." Linda fumbled with her clipboard, producing a stack of glossy photos. Madison's 15th was absolutely magical. The pool really made it special. All the kids loved it. Sarah stared at the images, teenagers splashing in what was unmistakably her pool. Her patio furniture pushed aside to make room for party decorations. Her carefully tended garden trampled by dozens of feet. "When was this taken?" "Last August," Janet chirped. "Still recording. You were at that conference, remember? Karen has the spare key from when you went to visit your mother in the hospital." The words hit Sarah like ice water. "You used my pool. While I was gone, you weren't using it," Karen said with a dismissive wave, "and it worked out beautifully. The HOA even voted to reimburse you for the cleaning and chemical costs." "Well, most of them." Sarah's vision tunneled. The spare key given in good faith when her mother had suffered a stroke. When Karen had offered to water her plants and collect her mail, she'd been grateful then, touched by what seemed like genuine neighborly concern. "You had no right." The words came out barely above a whisper. "Right?" Karen's voice rose an octave. "Sarah, we're neighbors. We're a community. This is what communities do. They share resources. They help each other out. Your pool sits empty 90% of the time while my daughter and her friends could be making memories. Making memories in my backyard, with my utilities, using my property." Sarah's temper finally cracked through her composure. "Without my permission." "Oh, for heaven's sake." Karen rolled her eyes theatrically. "Fine. I'm asking permission now. May we please use your pool for Madison's party this Saturday?" "No." The single word hung in the air like a slap. Karen's face cycled through confusion, disbelief, and finally settling on indignation. "No, no, you can't use my pool. You can't access my backyard. You certainly can't heat my pool to your preferred temperature on my electric bill." Sarah crossed her arms. "And I want my spare key back." Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Linda clutched her clipboard tighter, and Janet's phone wobbled in her grip as she struggled between recording and fleeing. "But the invitations are already sent," Linda whispered. "The caterers are booked," Janet added. 67 people are expecting a pool party," Karen said, her voice gaining strength and volume. You can't just say no. Watch me." For a moment, Sarah thought Karen might actually explode. Her face flushed crimson, her hands trembled, and a vein pulsed visibly in her forehead. "This is ridiculous," Karen sputtered. "Absolutely ridiculous. You're being petty and selfish, and cruel to a 16-year-old girl. I'm being protective of my property. Your property that sits unused while you hide in this house, like some kind of hermit." Karen's voice dripped venom. "When's the last time you even had friends over? When's the last time you contributed anything to this neighborhood besides complaints and property line disputes?" The words stung because they held a grain of truth. Since David's death 2 years ago, Sarah had indeed become more reclusive, finding solace in solitude rather than the suffocating sympathy of neighbors who meant well but understood nothing. "That's enough," Sarah said quietly. "No, it's not enough. You know what your problem is, Sarah? You're bitter. You're a bitter, lonely woman who can't stand seeing other people happy. You'd rather let that beautiful pool sit empty than share a moment of joy with a child. Get out. We'll see about this." Karen spun toward the door, her entourage scrambling to follow. "The HOA board is meeting tonight. We'll just see what they have to say about community members who refuse to participate in neighborhood events. The HOA has no authority over my private property," Sarah called after them. Karen paused at the door, turning back with a smile. That was all teeth and no warmth. "Don't be so sure about that, neighbor. The covenants are very clear about maintaining community standards and neighborly cooperation. Very clear indeed." The door slammed behind them, leaving Sarah alone in the sudden silence. Through the window, she watched Karen gesticulate wildly to her followers, no doubt planning her next assault. Her phone was already pressed to her ear calling reinforcements, Sarah suspected. She walked to the sliding glass door and stared out at her pool. The morning sun turned the water into liquid sapphire, perfectly still and peaceful. David had designed it himself, spending months planning every detail. The infinity edge that seemed to blend with the horizon. The integrated spa where they'd spent countless evenings talking about their future. The underwater lighting that turned evening swims into something magical. It was beautiful. It was hers. And apparently, Karen Whitmore believed she was entitled to it. Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Heard about the drama. Karen's telling everyone you're destroying Madison's party. Just thought you should know. Tom 3 houses down." Then another. "Girl, Karen is losing IT on the neighborhood Facebook page. You might want to check it out." Melissa Sarah opened Facebook with trembling fingers. The Willowbrook Estates residence page blazed with activity. Karen's post, shared just minutes ago, already had dozens of comments and reactions. "Neighbors, I need your help. As many of you know, my daughter, Madison Sweet 16, is this Saturday, a milestone we've been planning for months. We specifically chose our neighborhood because of the sense of community and support we've always found here. Unfortunately, one resident has decided that personal grudges are more important than a child's happiness. After using our shared community resources all year, including snow removal, landscaping, and neighborhood watch, this person is now refusing to allow Madison's party access to a pool that sits empty 360 days a year. I'm not naming names, but I'm sure you can figure out who I mean. Is this really the kind of neighbor we want in our community? Is this the example we want to set for our children? Madison is heartbroken, and frankly, so am I. Hashtag community matters. Hashtag neighborhood spirit. Hashtag think of the children." The comments were already pouring in. "Oh my God, Karen, I can't believe this. So sorry for Madison. Some people are just selfish. Poor Madison, who has a pool and won't share it. That's just wrong. Karen, message me privately. I know someone with a pool truck. We can bring the party to you." But scattered among the support were other voices. Wait, there are two sides to every story. Since when is anyone obligated to share their private property? Maybe ask before assuming. Sarah's hands shook as she scrolled through the digital battlefield. Karen had created. The Willowbrook Estates Community Center had never felt smaller. Sarah arrived at 6:55 p.m. to find every folding chair occupied, with overflow spectators lining the walls like courtroom observers hungry for blood. The air crackled with tension and whispered conversations that died the moment she entered. Karen sat in the front row, flanked by Linda and Janet like a queen holding court. She'd changed into a navy blazer and pearl necklace, her armor for suburban warfare. When their eyes met, Karen's smile was razor-sharp with anticipated victory. "Sarah," Richard Henley called from the head table, his voice carrying the weight of reluctant authority. "Thank you for coming. Please take a seat so we can begin." Sarah chose an empty chair in the back corner, acutely aware of the 50 pairs of eyes tracking her movement. Melissa Rodriguez caught her eye and offered a subtle thumbs up, but she was vastly outnumbered by Karen's supporters. "This emergency. The session has been called to address a community dispute between neighbors," Richard began, shuffling papers with obvious discomfort. "Karen Whitmore has filed a formal complaint regarding alleged violations of our community cooperation standards. Karen, you have the floor." Karen rose with theatrical grace, turning to address the room rather than the board. "Thank you, Richard. Neighbors, friends, I come before you tonight not as someone seeking personal gain, but as a mother advocating for her child and our community values. She gestured toward a blown-up photo on an easel. Madison, in her cheerleader uniform, beaming at the camera. This is my daughter Madison. Many of you have watched her grow up in our neighborhood. You've seen her at our block parties, our charity drives, our community events. She's been part of the Willowbrook family since she was 5 years old. Murmurs of recognition rippled through the crowd. Sarah's stomach tightened. In 3 days, Madison turned 16, a milestone that should be celebrated with joy and community support. We've spent months planning a party that would showcase the best of our neighborhood, the kind of event that brings families together and creates lasting memories. Karen paused for effect, her voice catching slightly. Unfortunately, one of our neighbors has decided that personal animosity matters more than a child's happiness. Despite having a beautiful pool that sits unused day after day, this person has refused to allow Madison's friends access to what could make her sweet 16 truly special. The crowd stirred restlessly. Someone in the middle called out, "That's terrible." "I'm not here to name names or point fingers," Karen continued, though her gaze flickered meaningfully toward Sarah. "I'm here to ask, what kind of community are we? Are we neighbors who support each other, who share our blessings and lift each other up? Or are we strangers hiding behind property lines, hoarding resources while children's dreams are crushed?" Sarah's hands clenched in her lap. The manipulation was masterful. Hannah painted herself as the grieving mother and Sarah as the neighborhood Grinch, all while conveniently omitting the crucial details. "I've brought documentation," Karen announced, producing a thick binder. Precedents from other HOA communities where neighbors have successfully shared resources for special occasions. Insurance information showing that liability concerns are minimal. Cost breakdowns proving that utility expenses would be fully covered. She handed the binder to Richard, who accepted it with obvious reluctance. "I've also prepared a community impact statement," Karen continued, "signed by 37 households expressing support for reasonable accommodation in special circumstances. These are your neighbors, your friends, asking for compassion and flexibility." The petition made its way around the board table. Sarah watched Richard's face grow increasingly grim as he read. In conclusion, Karen said, her voice rising with emotion, "I'm not asking for charity. I'm asking for the spirit of cooperation that makes Willowbrook Estates more than just a collection of houses that makes us a true community." Madison's party isn't just about one teenager. It's about showing our children what it means to be good neighbors, good people, good members of society. She sat down to scattered applause. Richard cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Thank you, Karen." "Sarah, would you like to respond?" Sarah stood on unsteady legs, feeling the weight of hostile stares. "I'd like to clarify a few facts that seem to have been overlooked." "Here we go," someone muttered from the crowd. "First, this isn't about denying a child's happiness. It's about property rights and consent. No one has the right to use another person's private property without permission, regardless of the occasion. But she's not using it," Janet called out, earning a sharp look from Richard. "Second," Sarah continued, her voice gaining strength, "this isn't the first time my pool has been used without permission. Last August, while I was at the hospital with my dying mother, Karen accessed my backyard using a spare key given for emergencies and held Madison's 15th birthday party in my pool." The room fell silent. Karen's face flushed crimson. "I only learned about this today, when Janet showed me photographs of 60 strangers in my backyard, using my utilities, trampling my garden, and leaving me with hundreds of dollars in cleanup and chemical costs. The HOA reimbursed me for most of these expenses, suggesting this was somehow officially sanctioned." Richard frowned at his notes. "Karen, is this accurate?" "It was a misunderstanding," Karen said quickly. "Sarah was out of town, the community pool was closed for repairs, and Madison was heartbroken. I made an executive decision, in the spirit of neighborly accommodation." "You made a criminal decision," Sarah shot back. "It's called trespassing." The crowd erupted in competing voices. Richard banged his gavel repeatedly. Order, let Sarah finish." "Third," Sarah continued when the noise subsided, "I want to address the community cooperation clause that's been cited. I've reviewed our covenants extensively since receiving this complaint. Section 4.7 requires residents to maintain their properties and participate in community activities. It does not grant the HOA authority to compel private property sharing or to override individual property rights." She pulled out her own folder, thinner than Karen's but carefully organized. "I've consulted with a property attorney who confirms that any attempt to force private pool sharing would violate both state property law and our own covenant restrictions on HOA overreach." Richard accepted her documents with obvious relief. Finally, something concrete to work with. "Furthermore," Sarah said, warming to her argument, "I want to address the character assassination masquerading as community concern. I've lived in this neighborhood for 8 years. I've participated in charity drives, block parties, and community cleanups. I've never filed frivolous complaints or violated community standards. My only crime is setting reasonable boundaries. Around my private property, she turned to face the crowd directly. How many of you would want strangers using your pool without permission? How many would appreciate coming home to find your backyard commandeered for someone else's party? How many think it's reasonable to demand access to a neighbor's private property with 3 days' notice? The room grew uncomfortably quiet as people shifted in their seats. Finally, Sarah said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. I want to address the emotional manipulation happening here. Yes, Madison is a lovely girl. Yes, turning 16 is special. But someone else's celebration doesn't create an obligation for me to sacrifice my privacy, security, and property rights. The disappointment of one teenager doesn't trump the fundamental principle that people own what they own. She sat down to dead silence. The contrast with Karen's reception was stark. Richard consulted with the other board members in hushed tones before speaking. This is a complex situation involving both community, harmony, and individual rights. We need time to review the documentation and legal precedents before making any determination. How much time? Karen demanded. The board will render a decision by Friday evening 20-4 hours before the scheduled party. Karen's face went white. That's cutting it very close. That's the best we can do, given the complexity of the issues involved. As the meeting broke up, Sarah found herself surrounded by a small knot of supporters: Melissa, Tom from 3 houses down, elderly Mrs. Patterson, who'd always been kind, and surprisingly, Dan Morrison, Janet's husband. That took guts, Dan said quietly. Janet's been swept up in Karen's drama, but I told her from the beginning this was wrong. Nobody should have to share their pool just because someone else wants a party. Thank you, Sarah murmured, touched by the unexpected support. But the encouragement was overwhelmed by the dirty looks and whispered comments from Karen's faction as they filed out. Sarah heard fragments, selfish, heartless, poor Madison, Karen herself approached as Sarah gathered her papers. This isn't over, she said, her voice low and venomous. You think you're so smart with your lawyers and your property rights, but this community will remember how you treated a child. They'll remember what kind of neighbor you really are. They'll remember what kind of neighbor you are to Karen, the kind who steals pool parties and lies about permission. Karen's mask of maternal concern finally slipped, revealing raw fury underneath. You have no idea what you've started. No idea at all. She stalked away, Linda and Janet scrambling to keep up. Sarah watched them go, her heart hammering against her ribs. Outside in the parkin', Friday morning arrived, with the kind of crisp clarity that made everything seem possible. Sarah stood in her kitchen at 5 a.m., watching the sunrise paint her pool in shades of possibility, while her coffee brewed and her phone buzzed with updates. From Amy's investigator, the final report was devastating. Karen Whitmore wasn't just financially troubled, she was systematically defrauding her neighbors. The charity auction embezzlement was the tip of the iceberg. She'd been skimming from HOA funds as the unofficial social coordinator, overcharging for community events and pocketing the difference. The private investigator had traced nearly $12,000 in fraudulent expenses over the past 18 months. But the nuclear option was something else entirely. Karen had been running an insurance scam, staging minor accidents and property damage to collect settlements. The suspicious house fire at her previous address was just one of 7 insurance claims in 5 years, each one just under the threshold that would trigger a fraud investigation. Sarah's attorney had been ecstatic when she'd presented the evidence. This changes everything, he'd said. She can't maintain moral authority while sitting on this kind of criminal behavior. The restraining order won't survive first contact with the judge who sees this documentation. At 8:30 a.m., Sarah walked into the courthouse feeling like a gunslinger. Approaching a showdown, Karen was already there with her attorney, looking polished and confident in another expensive suit that Sarah now knew she couldn't afford. The legal team Karen had hired was topped her clearly. She was betting everything on this final gambit. Your Honor, Karen's attorney began, my client represents the interests of an entire community being held hostage by one individual's antisocial behavior. Ms. Chen has consistently refused to participate in neighborhood activities, has erected barriers both literal and figurative between herself and her neighbors, and now seeks to punish a child for the supposed sins of her mother. The lawyer painted a picture of Sarah as a reclusive misanthrope whose pool refusal was part of a broader pattern of hostility toward community life. Character witnesses testified to her unfriendly demeanor, her failure to attend social gatherings, her installation of privacy fencing that changed the neighborhood's open feel. It was a masterful performance, and Sarah watched the judge's expression grow increasingly stern as he listened to the parade of testimony about her alleged antisocial behavior. Then it was her attorney's turn. Your Honor, my client is not on trial for the crime of being introverted. She's being attacked by a neighbor who believes that property rights are subordinate to social pressure. But before we address the legal merits of forced property sharing, I think the court needs to understand who's really making these demands. He placed a thick file on the judge's desk. Ms. Whitmore has presented herself as a concerned mother and community leader. The evidence shows she's actually a serial fraudster who's been systematically stealing from her neighbors while using social manipulation to maintain her facade. Karen's face went white as her attorney frantically objected. But the judge was already reading, his expression growing darker with each page. Ms. Whitmore, the judge said quietly, are you aware that filing false insurance claims is a felony? The courtroom fell silent. Karen's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Your Honor, her attorney interjected, these allegations are unsubstantiated and irrelevant to the matter at hand. 7 insurance claims in 5 years, each one involving suspicious circumstances and convenient timing. The judge continued, still reading. A house fire that occurred 2 weeks before a foreclosure notice, a robbery that happened the day after you discovered your jewelry wasn't covered by your existing policy, a car accident that occurred in an empty parking lot with no witnesses. Karen finally found her voice. Those are all legitimate claims. I've never been charged with anything. Because you've been careful to stay under the radar, Sarah's attorney said, but when you steal from community funds, when you embezzle from children's charities, when you systematically defraud insurance companies, a pattern emerges. He produced bank records, forged receipts, and witness statements from the charity auction. The evidence was overwhelming and meticulously documented. Furthermore, Your Honor, Ms. Whitmore accessed my client's property without permission last year, while Ms. Chen was caring for her dying mother. This isn't about community cooperation, it's about a woman who believes other people's property exists for her benefit. The judge set down the file and looked directly at Karen. Ms. Whitmore, I'm dismissing this restraining order and referring these documents to the district attorney's office for investigation. You're lucky I don't hold you in contempt for wasting this court's time with frivolous litigation while sitting on this kind of criminal behavior. Karen's attorney was whispering urgently in her ear, but she shook him off and stood up. This is ridiculous. Those documents are fabricated. Sarah Chen hired investigators to destroy me because she's a bitter, lonely woman who can't stand seeing other people happy. Ma'am, sit down, the judge warned. No, I won't sit down while my character is assassinated by someone who's never contributed anything to our community. She hides in her house like a hermit, refuses to participate in neighborhood activities, and now she's using lies and manipulation to destroy my family. The irony was breathtaking. Karen was describing her own behavior while accusing Sarah of the very crimes she'd been committing. Ms. Whitmore, if you don't sit down immediately, I'll hold you in contempt. But Karen was beyond reason, her careful facade cracking completely. You want to know the truth? Fine. Yes, I used her pool last year without asking. So what? It was sitting empty while she was playing grieving widow for attention. Yes, I expected to use it again, because that's what neighbors do, they share resources and support each other. But she couldn't handle seeing a child happy because she's too selfish and bitter too. That's enough. The judge's gavel cracked like a gunshot. Ms. Whitmore, you're in contempt of court. Bailiff, please escort her out. The courtroom erupted as Karen was led away, still shouting about injustice and community values. Her attorney gathered his papers with obvious disgust, muttering about clients who destroyed their own cases. Sarah sat in the sudden silence, hardly believing what had just happened. In less than an hour, Karen had gone from neighborhood power broker to confessed trespasser. Facing potential criminal charges, her attorney squeezed her shoulder. Well, that's one way to win a case. Your pool is safe, and I suspect Ms. Whitmore won't be bothering you again anytime soon. But Sarah's victory felt hollow. Outside the courthouse, she could see Madison sitting in a car with an older woman, probably her grandmother. Both of them crying. The teenager's party was tomorrow, and now her mother was facing criminal investigation. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Amy. Saw the news alerts. You won. How do you feel? How did she feel? Vindicated. Certainly. Relieved that the legal threat was over, but also strangely empty, as if the victory had cost more than she'd expected. She drove home through a neighborhood that would never be the same. Word of the court hearing had already spread through the Willowbrook gossip network. Some neighbors watched her pass with newfound respect, others with wariness. She'd proven she could fight back, but she'd also revealed the kind of ammunition she was willing to use. The pool sat in her backyard, still and perfect, exactly as it had been when this whole mess started, but everything around it had changed. That afternoon, her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw Madison Whitmore standing alone on her doorstep, still in her school uniform, her eyes red from crying. Sarah opened the door cautiously. Madison, how are you holding up? My mom's been arrested, the teenager said quietly, for fraud. The police came to school and took her away in handcuffs. Everyone saw. Sarah's heart clenched. I'm sorry. I know this is difficult. Is it true? What they're saying about the insurance money and the charity funds? I don't know all the details, but the evidence seemed pretty compelling. Madison nodded, tears streaming down her face. I found some of the paperwork in her office. Bills we can't pay, letters from lawyers, bank statements showing money that should have been there but wasn't. I think it's been going on for a long time." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. "My party's tomorrow," Madison said finally. "Obviously, it's canceled. Grandma's here, and she's trying to figure out what to do about the house, about school, about everything. But I wanted to come apologize." "Madison, you don't need to." "Yes, I do. Mom used your pool without asking. That was wrong. Then she tried to force you to let us use it again, and when you said no, she destroyed your reputation, took you to court, spent money we didn't have on lawyers, and it turns out she was stealing from people the whole time." The girl's voice broke. "I'm so ashamed. Everyone at school is talking about it. My friends don't know what to say. The volleyball team is treating me like I have some kind of disease. And it's all because my mom couldn't accept that someone told her no." Sarah felt tears prick her own eyes. "Madison, you're not responsible for your mother's choices. But I am responsible for mine. I called you that night and said awful things. I blamed you for ruining my party when you were just protecting your home.